educators, and I want to hear from all of you guys as much as you're hearing from me today. So I have a lot of interactive activities we'll do together, but don't hesitate to throw something in the chat, raise your hand to get my attention, and I'm always happy to be responsive to you guys. I want to hear from you, as like I said, as much as you hear from me. So, EdTech tools for distance learning. I realized a little while into this presentation that the title is maybe misleading, because what we're talking about today, while it does apply to distance learning, it will apply also when you go back to the classroom and you're taking the EdTech tools that you've learned over the last year into physical classrooms. So whether we're doing distance learning or whether we are in person, I think everything that we explore today will apply. As Tiffany said, my name is Rachel Riggs. I'm the instructional specialist for the ESL classes at Frederick Community College. And I want to shout out to Emmy, one of our teachers who's also in the audience today, who also teaches for CASA. Good to see you. Well, actually, let me go back. This QR code here that you guys see on the screen will take you to a Wakelet with all of the resources from today's presentation. The Wakelet looks like this. Give me a thumbs up if you're seeing the Wakelet. Awesome. And it has my slides from today. It has various links and things that I'll be referencing. Please, if at some point I talk about something or refer to something that you want to explore more later, let me know. I can add it to the Wakelet right after my presentation, and then you'll be able to refer back to it. So just don't hesitate to request that I share that out after I'm done presenting today as well. I am going to put in the chat box the link to this Wakelet in case you don't want to scan the QR code. So if you open up the chat, there's a link there now for you so that you can access everything from today's presentation. Okay, so what are we talking about today? The first thing that I want to talk about is the strategic use of educational technology. I will not be training you in using all the EdTech tools today. We'll save that for another 1 hour tomorrow. No, just kidding. But I am of the opinion that if we can take a strategic approach to educational technology, it is less overwhelming for us and for our learners. So we'll talk about that today. We're also going to talk about the process of choosing and evaluating the tools that we implement in the classroom. And then finally, I think you guys at the end of today's talk will be well on your way to building your own toolkit that you will find to be effective in the classroom. So what is an EdTech tool? I think at this point over the last year, we have all become a lot more familiar with this term. An EdTech tool is an educational technology tool. They are digital tools that we use for learning or teaching. Is everybody seeing my stuff okay? My slides? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. So some examples of those are in the little white bubbles that you see on the screen, and they can really range in terms of what they do for us and for our learners. They might be assessment tools like Google Forms or quizzes or Quizlet. They might be communication tools like Talking Points or WhatsApp. They might be learning management systems like Google Classroom, Blackboard, or Canvas. So there are a lot of different categories, and there are a lot of different tools. So I want to hear from you guys if you'll tell me in the chat box, how many new EdTech tools did you learn to use over the last year? So was it 0, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, or more than 5? Open up the chat and let me know about how many do you think you learned to use? Andy says 1 to 3. Okay. 3 to 5 from Amy. Nancy learned 0. Okay, 1 to 3, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 1 to 3, 1 to 3. Okay. Great. Yes. This past year and the year prior, I think was a big booming year for learning new technology. And what I found over the course of the past year or so is that it's kind of like I had a suitcase and I was stuffing EdTech tools in it. And anytime that I saw a webinar or a training that had, something to do with a technology tool that I could learn and I could use, I stuffed it in that suitcase and I learned it and I stuffed it and I stuffed it, I stuffed it, I stuffed it. And I was just collecting these tools kind of haphazardly. Nothing wrong with that. I love technology. So yes, I collected a lot of tools and I like my tools. But in terms of the tools that we use in the classroom, I don't think that this suitcase stuffing approach works well for learning and for making progress. And that's going to be a little bit of what we talk about today. So the reason that I was stuffing is because we're in the emergency remote teaching scenario. I always find it fascinating to read about emergency remote teaching. What is that? I was a little bit after this term was coined by EdCase, by this article that's on my slide. I came to realize that we were not the first ones ever to do this. And of course that makes sense, right? So in any times of crisis or conflict or emergency, many countries and societies have had to turn to emergency remote teaching. So one example is from Afghanistan years ago, not in the current crisis, but possibly in the current crisis, when there was a conflict that targeted young women receiving education. And so they started using radio and DVDs to reach those students and target those young women so that they could or get their education. So emergency remote teaching didn't happen just because of the coronavirus. It's happened many times throughout history. And it's kind of marked by an increase in teachers having to problem solve quickly and taking more control over the instructional design of their classrooms, developing their own curriculum and really planning out the scope and sequence for how their classes will work. It's also marked by an increase in the need to support teachers, and it's characterized by being a rapid and temporary solution. So how do we go from emergency remote teaching to strategic and purposeful distance learning? Distance learning is defined as education that is delivered while the teacher and student are separated either by distance or time or both. So it may be that you're doing remote learning in which you're teaching, you're not separated by time, but you are separated by distance. It may be an online course in which you would be separated by both distance and time, but all of that falls into distance learning. So going from emergency remote teaching to distance learning, I want to hear from you guys. What to you are some of the differences between those two different approaches, emergency remote teaching and distance learning? In the chat, please. What are the differences? Okay, thanks, Andy. When it's emergency remote teaching, no one has any expectations. Yeah, it can be kind of freeing sometimes, right? Amy, ERT, crisis-related distance learning, right? Yes, that's a great way to word it. So we have ERT, which would be crisis-related distance learning, while distance learning is by choice, by convenience, and hopefully more strategic and planned. Yes, like Rosa said, more planned and learner specific. ERT, there's usually little time period. Distance learning is planned. Yes, so we're seeing a lot of planned. Okay. Here. Yes, and both of these are great, right? It's great to respond in an emergency and deliver education. It's great to have a strategic approach to distance learning so that students with transportation barriers or other barriers that prevent them from being in a physical classroom have an option to access education. Yes, so a lot of planning, right? Knowing what to expect, preparing, planning, be ready to be more flexible by ERT. ERT is by the seat of our pants, yes. So I don't know about all of your classes, but in our program, we did not have distance learning. That was not an option prior to the pandemic. So we were very much in an emergency remote teaching situation over the last year. And now we're shifting to a program that has diverse course formats, right? So we have now distance learning options as well as in-person options. And how does that apply to educational technology? A lot of you already have touched on that in the chat, right? We, in emergency remote teaching, might be stuffing the tools into our suitcase, whereas in distance learning, we are looking out into the future and we're planning and we're choosing tools strategically for instruction. So if you guys have a pen and paper to take notes, please grab it now. I will be asking you a little bit about your notes. So nothing too scary. No pass or fail or anything. You're all gonna pass. So what is an EdTech toolkit? So when we talk about emergency remote teaching versus distance learning, I kind of thought about, rather than my suitcase stuffed with tools, I need to create an EdTech toolkit. I need to create a set collection of tools. I know each tool's purpose and I'm using them purposefully and effectively in the classroom. And I'm no longer experimenting with tools. I am now pulling from a toolkit, just like I would pull a hammer from a toolkit, and I know what exactly to do with the hammer. So you can think of an EdTech toolkit as a program or an individual instructor's chosen set of EdTech tools implemented consistently and purposefully with learners. So as we move from emergency remote teaching into strategic distance learning, how do we develop our EdTech toolkit? And as this says, it can be a program's EdTech toolkit, or it can be your own EdTech toolkit. If you have the freedom to use any tools that you want and you're implementing them somewhat independently, then you can create your own Rachel Riggs Teacher EdTech toolkit. And these are the tools I use, and this is why I use them. So how do we do that? So first we need a framework to work with. And there are frameworks for EdTech tools out there, and they all take a little bit of a different approach. So let's look at some of them and let's think critically about, why is that going to work for me and why would it not work for me? The first example is from St. Paul, Minnesota, and this was a curriculum that was designed for ESL learners to learn customer service. It was a customer service class. And here they chose the EdTech tools based on the curriculum. So they had different skills and language aspects in the curriculum: vocabulary, reading, grammar, listening, and then they also wanted to incorporate assessment. So they chose all of these tools based off of their curriculum. And every time that the students were going to practice vocabulary, they were practicing it with a Google slide. When they were doing reading comprehension activities, they went to a Google Doc. When they were doing grammar, it was a Google Sheets. When they were doing listening, YouTube, and assessment was Google Forms. So I want you guys to just put in the chat, is there anything you notice about this EdTech toolkit? Anything that stands out to you about this, about the tools that they chose or how they structured it, anything like that? Yeah, okay, good. Somebody got probably one of the most clear ones, right? These are all Google tools. So we can probably assume that they worked very well together because they're all Google tools and they integrate nicely and they tend to have a similar interface. Stacy said these are tools everyone has easy access to. Yes, so we know if you have a Google account, you can access all of these tools. Anything else that you notice? No right answers here. I'm really just curious. Yeah, I agree, Andy. They probably learned more about their curriculum by organizing around EdTech, or maybe even they learned more about EdTech by organizing around their curriculum. And I always like to point out too that they started with the objectives, right? They started with the objectives. The EdTech tools didn't come first. They didn't go and see, oh my gosh, look at this. This is Quizlet. Let's make this a vocabulary class. They went and they had their objectives, and they chose tools that were going to push learners closer to those objectives. Thank you, guys. Another example is the 7 elements and 3 practices. This comes from New York, the Literacy Assistance Center in New York, and they developed this for their remote classes. And you can see they have the 3 practices that surround this circle, which are strive for presence, interactivity is key, and let the students do the work. I love that they enveloped their elements in those practices, because I think those are great. And then within, they have the 7 elements that they found were necessary for a robust remote lesson. So they have the learning management system like Google Classroom or Blackboard, a video conferencing platform like Zoom, interactive learning tools, so it's something that the students can interact with and engage with, a feedback tool, content specific tools. So those are for delivering content. So something like YouTube, where you have a grammar video, or Burlington English, where you have full lessons, a whiteboard, a digital whiteboard, and an assessment tool. Anything you notice about this? Anything that stands out to you or catches your attention? Curious, especially to know if, okay, interaction, thanks Bernice, if there's maybe an element here that in your own practice you haven't thought about, or you don't really have a tool for. Okay, Rosa says students interaction, no tools listed. That's right. There are no tools at this time. We are going to look at specific tools for each of these elements in just a minute. Stacy says it allows the freedom to utilize tools you're familiar using, like Blackboard versus Google Classroom. Yeah, so this is kind of a freer approach, right? So if we go based off of a curriculum and we choose the tools, teachers then have to know those tools and be able to implement them. If we use something like this, teachers can choose tools that they already know and may not need training in, and then they can just fill in the gaps. Good point, Stacy. Thank you. Any other standout thoughts about this particular framework? Yes, test, turn it in, test, turn it in tool. I think you're saying you can turn tests into a tool with the assessment tool. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Laura. They will need training in addition to regular curricular content. Good point. Okay, so let's go to one more example. This example breaks down kind of the tools purposes into 3 categories. The first is communication, and then content delivery, and management and tracking of the students. This one was developed by Crowded Learning, and it kind of is a little more robust in terms of helping educators think through the choice of tools. So you can kind of see it breaks it down into a kind of rubric format. What's your purpose for communication? What are the logistics of the tool? And then what tools are you already using, and what tools are learners familiar with? And does anything stand out to you about using this particular way of choosing EdTech tools and choosing a structure? Again, all of these will be in my Wakelet at the end too. So if you're looking at these papers, trying to read that, you'll have access to this. Okay, I like this. Amy says an organized way of thinking about what EdTech tools you could utilize in your online classroom. Yes, absolutely. Does anybody so far have kind of out of 1, 2, and 3 examples, one that you thought, oh, that's clever. I think I might like to use that one from 1, 2, and 3. So the one was around curriculum, number two was around the different parts of the lesson, and then number three was around communication, content delivery, and management. Bernice says she liked number two. I like number two too, Bernice. I see strengths and weaknesses in all of them, but yeah, okay, then we have a number three. Great, Amy. And more number twos. Okay, cool. Yeah, again, no right answer. It's just each person's preference. And the purpose of showing you these examples is to help you think about what kind of framework can I use to make sure that my use of EdTech tools is driven by the objectives of my class, driven by my goals, and is robust in terms of, you know, like I said, if we go in to a lesson and we're letting Quizlet drive that lesson, well, suddenly our lesson turns into a whole lot of vocabulary practice, right? If we go into a lesson and we're letting Google Forms drive that lesson, suddenly it's a very quizzy lesson. So how do we get a robust framework, just like we start with our lesson plan and we know there are different components we want to include? How do we use that same framework to choose our EdTech tools and let our lesson drive our EdTech toolkit? So we're going to jump over now to a Jamboard, one of my favorite EdTech tools, very collaborative. It's a digital whiteboard. And I am going to, we have 3 frames. So I'm going to just show you guys real quick how to use it, and then I'll put the link in the chat for you to add your tools. We have 3 frames. On the first frame is the first example that I used. On the second frame is the second example. And then the third was that final example of communication, content delivery, and management and tracking. What I would like at this point is for you guys to add sticky notes to my Jamboard with names of tools that you use for these different purposes. So if you really liked number 2, you'll see I'm navigating between the frames up here in the top center of the screen. If you liked number 2, go to that frame and let us know what tool are you using for assessment, what tool are you using for LMS, what tool are you using for video conferencing. And the purpose of this is to think about, first of all, what gaps do I have? What could I use a little more training in? Maybe I don't have a whiteboard tool, so I want to explore that a little more. And also, hopefully, we'll see some sticky notes and we'll think, oh, maybe I'll check that out. Maybe that would fill my gap. So let's collaborate together. And over here on the left side of the screen, I have a toolbar. I'm using the word tool a lot. Okay, and here in the middle, you'll see a sticky note. If you click on the sticky note tool, you can write the name of the tool, click save, click cancel when you're done. You don't want to add another sticky note, and then you can move your sticky note around to these different sections. So maybe I'm using Edpuzzle for listening practice, okay? You can also add text if you want, and however you're most comfortable adding the names of your tools, okay? So I'm going to drop the link into the chat, and you all will be able to collaborate on the Jamboard. You'll be seeing your own screen instead of my screen, and you can add various tools to any of the frames. You can add your tools to every frame, or you can pick the frame that you like the most and add your tools there. Okay, I see people jumping in. Good, 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 good. Add your sticky notes. If you mark something up, it's okay. No worries, we can erase it. Okay, nice. I see ESL library. I wonder what they're using that for vocabulary. Cool. As we're filling these in, we might realize that one of these frameworks, for some reason or another, is not great because it doesn't give us room for this, or it didn't let me put this. Okay, somebody's on frame 2. Keep a rolling whiteboard and yes, I love that. I love that. So they use Word or a Google Doc as their whiteboard tool that then they can send out to students later. Great idea. So that is a whiteboard and kind of like a content delivery tool. Okay, I see Burlington English. We use that here at FCC. Burlington, and it's got a lot of different things integrated into it. So great. Okay, NYC Speaks, love that. Great resource. Oh, you know what I just remembered? I'm gonna add the link to this Jamboard to my Wakelet. So later you guys will be able to go back and look at this. And if you saw a tool or something, you thought, oh, I want to look that up and explore that, you will have access to this after the presentation. Okay, Ventures Online. Live worksheets. Emmy, is that you? I know you love live worksheets. That's not you. Okay. Live worksheets is great. Really fun. Quizzes. Oh, I see 2 live worksheets. Great. Okay. And then over here in our second frame, we've got Zoom, my favorite. For a video conferencing, we've got Edmodo for feedback. Nobody's on the third frame, so maybe we're deciding we didn't like that one very much. That's okay. Miro. Okay, what do you use Miro for? Drag it on over. For whiteboard, I think, right? Is it Miro a whiteboard tool? Oh, sure, Amy, thanks. I'm gonna label the third slide. Maybe that was confusing. So we have communication. And then we have content delivery. And we have management and tracking is that last one. Hey, Ashley, you shouldn't have to download Jamboard. That's really weird. It's browser based. I don't know. I don't know why it would have to be downloaded, but hopefully you're getting in. Great, Amy. I'm glad you've been using Jamboard. Jamboard is fun. It's pretty simple, very collaborative, and really can do a lot with it. Okay, somebody's using FaceTime for speaking and conversation. Okay, somebody's drawing on the board, no worries. Go over to the left where that toolbar is and click on the sticky note button. And you'll be able to pull up a sticky note. That looks like you got it, perfect. Okay, we got WhatsApp, Remind, Lumen. Okay, and somebody put on frame 3, the categories here seem to overlap. Communication and content delivery are intertwined, yes. And I think we'll see that too in a few of the frames. Sometimes we even have tools that are going to fit multiple purposes. So there's always going to be some overlap, right? But that helps us if we take a critical eye to these, it will help us kind of think about how we want to use a framework to choose our own EdTech tools. Kahoot, nice. Can't see what's behind Kahoot. Let me. Okay, nice. Okay, Stacy said she's on her cell phone. Okay, sorry about that, Stacy. We have Flippity, Easy English News. Okay, the first frame is getting a lot of great stuff here. Cool. Audio samples. Yes, please. If you have even like old school tech, please add that too. I think that's as valid as any of this newfangled software. All right, great. Well, this is a good starting point. I hope by doing that, first of all, I hope you're looking at some of these things people added and getting some new ideas. Second of all, I hope you're looking at these frameworks and thinking about where are your gaps in terms of the tools that you use and how can you fill them in and how can you drive your choices based on instructional best practices and encouraging learner progress. All right, I'm jumping back to my slides. If you want to follow along with me, go back to Zoom and you'll see my screen. If you want to keep adding to the Jamboard, please go for it. All right, so next question in the chat box. How would an EdTech toolkit benefit students? Okay, so we've looked at these frameworks. How do you think that determining a set group of tools is going to have a benefit on your students? What is the benefit to students of building an EdTech toolkit? Of their teacher building one, sorry, not them, their teacher. encourages student participation. Oh, good, Laura. I'm really glad. Pollyann said helps with tech literacy. Yes. Helps teacher keep class varied. Sure. Shows visual examples students will know they're doing based on the tech they're using. Yes. That's a good one, Tyra. So when I look at that curriculum one, sometimes I'm kind of like, well, I don't know if that's the way to go. But then I think, man, if the students knew every time they open Google Slides that they're going to be practicing vocabulary, if they know every time they're in Google Sheets they're practicing grammar, I think that consistency would be super helpful in a classroom. Yeah, and Andy says a classroom rhythm and a routine. Laura says it encourages diversity, and I like that. It really helps us think about how to have a robust set of tools. Just like any framework helps us identify our gaps, I do think it helps us really round out our set of tools that we use. Inclusive to all learner types. Thank you, Rosa. That we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute too. Different learning styles. It allows meeting the needs of diverse learning. Yes, this is awesome. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so we see a lot of benefits for students. What about the instructor? How could this benefit teachers? Yeah, thanks, Megan. Yeah, it makes lesson planning easier. If you're just using the same tools, right, you're kind of storing your materials in that way within that tool to then reuse and reuse and reuse. So yeah, great. And then what about programs? I don't know if we have administrators here, but what about an entire program building their set of EdTech tools? Do we see any benefit in that? Everything easily accessible. Yeah, totally. Yeah, consistency. Like Megan said, if students are moving from class to class, right, they're getting the same experience with the same tools. Even for training, I think if you know what tools everybody's using, you can really train them to become experts and masters in that tool. Great. Okay, so we've seen some of these benefits, right? So first of all, I think decision making as a teacher, right, it helps us make strong, instructionally sound decisions about the tools that we're using. And consistency, that was a big one that came through in all of your responses for students and for teachers. And then proficiency, right? The more that we're using the tools ourselves, the more that our students are using the tools, the more confident we feel, and the more we tap into these hidden features and these amazing, cool things that we can do with the tools. Okay, so how do we have a framework, right? We're starting with a framework, we're starting with a structure. How do we actually choose the tools to plug into the framework? There are a lot of considerations that I think we need to make when we're choosing tools. And I've laid out some of them in this pyramid, starting with the most basic, right? What does the tool do? So we're starting with that. We're not starting with, is it trendy? We're not starting with, does my best friend teacher tell me to use it? We're starting with, what does it actually do? And then how does that support the goals and objectives of my class and what we're trying to accomplish? And then what is the student's experience with the tool? Is it accessible? Is it something they can use easily? What is their experience going to be? Compatibility, does it work with other tools I use? And then longevity, is it something I can use for a long over time, and is something the students will use over time after they leave my class? So thinking through all of those questions. First of all, function. What does the tool do? How do we know the function of the tool? Well, we look at the website. We think about the fact that they are advertising the tool. So we take all of the great things that they claim on the website and we reduce those by about 20%, and then we'll know what it really does. We talk to other instructors who maybe have used the tool. We think about how we're already accomplishing that task. Okay, so if we're starting with our framework and vocabulary instruction or assessment is a piece of our framework, we can think about, well, how am I already doing that? And is it effective? And do I need to switch, or do I need to add anything to it? So I want you guys to go to flippity.net if you have a moment. And if you're already familiar, don't worry about going to the website. Just tell me, what does that tool do? What does Flippity do? Is going to get a lot of different answers, and that's okay. Oh, I just saw your comment, Amy, which is so true, that if we need to see students' progress and we're using the same tools, we can see that program live. Great. Yeah, lots of games, basically. Yeah. Okay, Stacy created a board game. Stacy, you better share the link to your board game. And it makes interactive games. Yes, Flippity is it's an interactive tool. And so it can accomplish a lot of different learning objectives, practicing different skills. And it's interactive for students. So do you use another tool for this, and which one? Okay, so think about Flippity, think about what it does. It's interactive, it's gamey. Do you have an interactive tool for games that would apply to different learning objectives already in your toolkit? If so, let us know. What's the tool? Kahoot. Okay, I was waiting for that. I was waiting for that. Yes, Kahoot. Kahoot is another interactive tool for gaming. And so, Cindy, when you're looking at your framework and you're thinking about interactive tools, right, you can say to yourself, you know what, I already have a tool for that. I have Kahoot. Or maybe you explore Flippity a little more and you realize, oh, it's got this that Kahoot doesn't have, and I want to switch over. But the point here is that you settle on a tool and you use it repeatedly if it's accomplishing the function that you needed it to accomplish for your class. So then the next, and one of the most important things I think is the goals. Okay, conjugamos. Okay, good. Thank you for that. Sorry, that must have sounded random if you're not looking at the chat. Somebody added another tool to the chat. Goals and objectives. So how do I use it to support learning? So now we know what it does, and then how am I actually going to leverage its function? Thinking beyond just engagement, right? Engagement is great, and we should keep learners engaged. We have to keep them engaged, but it's not everything. We also need to track their progress and give them feedback and deliver content, right? So thinking beyond engagement, what are other ways that a tool will support learning? Focus on progress. Is this going to help students progress, and how? And evidence-based strategies. You know the evidence-based strategies in your practice. Does this tool actually implement those? And then also, what's the class format when we're talking about goals and objectives? Are we using this for a remote synchronous class or an asynchronous online class? That will also change the tool that we need. So what instructional strategies are supported by a quizzing survey tool like Google or Microsoft Forms? How does that connect with goals, objectives, and what we know about best practices? You guys should just keep the chat open. I'm not going to stop. So what do those tools do for us instructionally? What do they do for the learners? Why are they important? Okay, I'm not seeing anything coming through. You guys are asleep. Assessment, right? Assessment, feedback, tracking progress. Thanks, Andy. The 3 Ps: presentation, practice, production. Yes, totally. And you can even include presentation in a Google form, right? If you put a video in there. Yes, thanks. Okay, so, focusing on, does the tool help me reach the objectives? Does the tool implement strategies that I know are effective for learners? As we're thinking about that, we have to think about the format, synchronous versus asynchronous. So on the screen, you're seeing 2 icons. The first one is for a Zoom breakout room, and the second one is for a tool called Flipgrid. Now, both of these tools can be helpful for speaking practice, okay? Breakout rooms put students into groups and they can have conversations in groups. Flipgrid is a video-based discussion board, so students can make videos in response to various prompts. But what is the difference between these? What is the difference when we're thinking about course format? If I'm doing an online class that's asynchronous, students are working at different schedules. Can I use a Zoom breakout room for them to practice speaking? No, right? That's not going to work. They're not on Zoom. They're not together at the same time. So thinking through, do I have a tool that's going to be effective for in-class synchronous instruction? And do I have a tool that's effective for asynchronous instruction, depending on what you teach, right? Yeah, thank you, Amy. Breakout room synchronous, Flipgrid asynchronous. Just like breakout rooms wouldn't make sense in that scenario, Flipgrid doesn't make sense if we're all in the same classroom together at the same time. So what makes sense with your course format? And then student experience. This one is super important. I think they're all important, but this is also super important. Is it accessible to learners who are developing their digital skills, have limited access to devices, or maybe using, say, cellular data? And so all of those are the three stools of digital inclusion, and we have to think through those as we're choosing EdTech tools. What is the wall? So most websites are behind a wall. Sometimes the wall is a pay wall, so students would have to pay for something. Sometimes it's just a sign-in wall, an email, they're collecting emails. Sometimes it's a URL and you click it and there really is no wall. So what is the wall for students to get into whatever tool that you're using? And then devices. I want to show you guys something really cool that I discovered recently. I'm going to try and be fast because we're running out of time. So for devices, how does it look on a smartphone? We know a lot of adult learners, especially English language learners, are using smartphones to connect to classes. So how does my tool look on a smartphone? Let's go back to my Jamboard. And I want to show you guys, this is in Google Chrome. So if you have the Google Chrome browser, you can do this. Up in the top right, there's a little some people call it a skinny snowman, an ellipsis. If you click on that, you're going to see a menu, and you can go to more tools and developer tools. This is meant for people who are designing apps to see how or designing websites to see how it's going to appear on different devices, but you can also use it for your class if you want to see how your tools are going to look. So if we have students in a Jamboard, we can drop down this menu here and select different devices. Let's go with a Galaxy S5. This is what the Jamboard is going to look like on their Galaxy S5. Look at all the empty space. I mean, this is going to be tiny in your fingers, right? But we can also use this tool to turn the device, rotate the device. So now we see if they hold it this way, actually it is quite functional. So what do we need to do? We need to help students understand that process of, hey, turn your devices. It's going to be a lot easier for you. We need to explicitly explain that in some instances. And then here we can even click on things. It's fully functional, just like a website. You're just seeing what it looks like on that device screen. So I love that little trick. I hope you love it too. So devices, what is the student experience on different devices? Readability, how is the text? Are things nice and big? Are things cramped? Is there a lot of distracting color? Are there ads everywhere? Thinking through all of that. And then internet access. If students are on cellular data and they're in your Zoom room, is it feasible for them to go into Google Earth and find Egypt? That is going to take up a lot of cellular data, or if they're on Wi-Fi, even a lot of bandwidth. So thinking through those types of things as well. And then finally, test as a student. In every tool I use, I have a student account and a teacher account. And I will log in as a student and see how things are going to play out for me as a student, and then log in as a teacher and assign things to students. So make sure you're testing as a student and you know exactly what their experience is, so that you can facilitate whatever onboarding needs to happen for them to access your tool. Oh gosh, only 6 minutes, Tiffany. Okay, just kidding, it's okay. Consider digital skills, very important. Like we talked about, what's the wall? And it's okay if the wall is a sign up wall. Then we need to help build that digital skill of creating a login, creating a strong password, and logging into a website, right? So think about the digital skills and how can you leverage the digital skills that are needed to use your tool and turn that into integrating digital literacy in your lesson. And then compatibility, does it work with your other tools? So we saw the example from St. Paul, they were all Google tools. So I'm sure that that teacher had no problem plugging those into their Google Classroom and voila. So we want to think about, is it working with the other tools that you're using? It doesn't have to all be fully integrated, but it will make your life easier if there is some integration, especially with a learning management system if you're using it. So all you have to do here is Google it. Google it. Is Edpuzzle compatible with Google Classroom? How do I integrate Microsoft Forms in my Blackboard site? Google that, and you'll find out quickly if they're going to go well together. Okay, we're going to skip that activity. And then, is the tool going to last for teachers and for students? So not all the time will your interactive fun tool be something that the students turn around and use later. No, that's not what I'm saying. But maybe you think about, what tools can I incorporate that are popular tools in the workplace or in the public school system? Can I choose tools that the students are going to turn around and continue using in other contexts in their life? So longevity for the students, longevity for you. We don't want to store a bunch of fun activities somewhere and poof, tomorrow that website is gone. It's not, you can't always predict that, but there are ways to think about it and consider it. This website shows us the ranking of various EdTech tools. It's going to be in the Wakelet, so you guys can look at it later. And so you can think, if you're choosing a video conferencing platform and you go to a website like this, maybe you choose the most popular one because you know it's going to give you a little bit more longevity and your skills are going to last you longer. So how do you get started? You choose a framework, choose a way to structure your EdTech tools. If you feel like you're starting with nothing and you don't know any EdTech tools, that's okay. Choose a framework and start chipping away at those different elements. Choose a whiteboard tool, get to know it, start feeling comfortable with it. Once you're comfortable, bring it to your classroom. Then go to an assessment tool, start using it. You know, it's okay if you're starting at zero. It's okay if you already have a bunch of tools. Organize them in that framework and see where your gaps are, or maybe where you have too many tools and maybe you're going all over the place, okay? So choose a framework, identify your gaps, evaluate the tools, implement them consistently, and then reevaluate and adapt because technology is ever changing, sadly. So I'm going to go ahead and pop, this is a Google Doc just with these steps and some things to think through. I'm going to pop the link to that in the chat. It will also be in the Wakelet. And I know that Tiffany is getting mad at me right now. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. These were some things to think about. So if you look at the slides later, I want you to think about, what tools did I use? I want you to evaluate me. Did I do a good job choosing my EdTech tools and using them throughout the presentation to work towards specific goals? And think about if there were any low-tech solutions that I used, what low-tech solutions could you use? And what skills and devices were needed to participate in this session. So judge me. It'll help you think about your lessons clearly. And let me know afterward too. Say, Rachel, you used this and it didn't make any sense. This is my email. I'm also on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. It was really a pleasure, you guys. I'm going to share everything that I just dumped at you in 30 minutes on my Wakelet. I'll put the link to that back into the chat box. And I hope this was helpful. I hope it's going to help you think through some of your decisions around EdTech. Please feel free to reach out to me if you need ideas for what tools to use, or if you want to explore these concepts a little further. Thank you, Tiffany. I'm handing it back to you to close it out. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that engaging and informative presentation. Can we all give Rachel a round of applause, please? Thank you so much. There's a lot of great information that she shared, so I will be sending out an email within the next day or two that contains a link to a recording of today's session, and also sharing all the, I see the collapse. Some people are happy about that. Good. As well as the resources that Rachel will be sharing here on Wakelet. We'll also share that in an email to all of you. In the chat, Halima, if you could please, thank you. Halima has dropped a link to a survey. Please take 3 minutes to complete that. This really gives us feedback around today's experience and your idea around professional development moving forward. Your feedback is invaluable as it helps us at McHale to continue to provide quality instruction and professional development support for you. And last but not least, I am also putting my email in the chat. I am available to you. I have an open door. I want to hear from you all, hear what's going on in your classrooms and your programs. So I have an open door. Feel free to message me at tross@mchale.org. So we'll be hanging around for another 5 minutes or so if you have any questions or comments. And as you're completing that survey, when you're finished, feel free to unmute yourself and say bye. Thank you all so much for being here and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Thank
Bye,
you for
everybody.
coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
I
Bye-bye.
appreciate it. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you for coming.